So then we are back with more understandings from the time of the Second Tabernacle services are refined in the Aramaic English translation of the word. This translation comes from the original manuscripts of the prophets of the Tzayelic lineage. So then we can understand the time of the end per Yeshayahu the prophet. We find then a layer of understanding of the 61st chapter, where then mentions of the spring feast, of the autumn feast, and also of the time of the restoration of the cities of the Messiah laid waste for many centuries. So during this time, where then the Creator decided then to include the Gentiles in this end of time plan, we find ourselves then tracing back the information from the time of Yeshayahu, and then also from the time of the completion of the spring feast. So then from Daniel, we already discovered there is the 11th chapter, where then the kingdom of the north, the rebirthing of the Soviet Union, and the relationship with Africa, then the southern kingdom. And it's very valid understanding also that during this time, then the Soviet Union makes most of the decisions as far as the Babylonian background of each nation. Then obviously then we find a couple of chapters later where then the dragon obviously shows then itself via the system, but it's not a bad term. It is a positive term because he is used as precision, not because the evil of it. So then let's try to understand then where the Chinese dragon then fits with this understanding, so then the trade can be re-established how it used to be in Asia. So then, obviously during the time of Shaliach Shaul, where we find then the transitional time from the first service and the second service, or first menorah and the second menorah, then we find ourselves understanding the work of Shaliach Shaul in Asia Minor, because those concentrations of set apart were then being delegated with responsibilities. Those are then known as the functions of Ruach HaKodesh, known as the world as Holy Spirit. But then, in the future then, when Yohanan was in the first holy city, he was the example of how then the cities should be. That's why we have Hebrews. Hebrews was then recorded by Yohanan while he gathered the entire documents of the transitional time, obviously. And then he sent those documents to the other 7 cities in Asia Minor, where they were straightened out from those sins of theirs, or not knowing what to do back then, because there was not a set record of how the cities should work after the Messiah gave them the order. But then obviously they were straightened out, and then it started a relationship of set apart, and then doing whatsoever Moses told them to do and observe based from the holy instructions, and then the Gentiles. So then during this time, where we find then the instructions stated that the Creator himself would use even those who are not from the lineage of Yitzhak. He would use them, and that is true, as long as the holy instructions, they remain absolutely intact. They must remain 100% intact. And then when a person explains, or galah, must not be above, must not be below. What was then instructed only remains as it was. So then, understandably, there are many situations going on during the Gentile transitional time of governments, where then those important nations, such as then China, Soviet Union, and Africa, or the Southern Kingdom, are then the main players of this time of the end, Gentile level, trade-wise. Because later we understand the restoration of the stick of the Ishmaelites are then related on Yeshayahu, the 62nd chapter. So there is a cleaning up of the instruction as far as the many centuries of then editing. And then when you read the golden turban, turbans were not used by the set apart. If you want to know what the priest or the high priest used, then watch what the Messiah was wearing. This is what the high priest then used. As far as ephod with so many kinds of stones and blah blah blah, it's not relevant. It's not relevant because the American archaeologist, when he found the cave where then Yirmiyahu the prophet had stored the forever, let's understand why, because when we read the instructions, we must understand it's not because the people they had stored the holy articles forever. Understandably, in human level, Yirmiyahu and the priest, they stored the forever for a time. So then we understand the proper mental state of the understanding when we read. Because honestly, we can't store away the forever. Can you store God? No, you can't. But meant the holy services were then stored for a time. And when then Ronald found the holy cave, where then the holy objectives were then set up from then on, and obviously was then the returning of the holy cities of the Messiah later ways for many centuries, then there is not on inventory the garment of the priest. So if it was relevant, then they would be there. It's not there because whatsoever we've then recorded as far as the priest and turban and golden turban and ephod and precious stones in the front, each stone symbolizing a tribe, is junk. It was invented. If it was relevant, it would be then an inventory on a cave. So then we find very easily, understandably, the Messiah was the high priest. So then the Messiah was wearing what the high priest used to wear. And there is no turban. They only use a veil. So then when we read, and the veil that was divided from the Holy of Holies was torn, and then you understand when they used to place their veil in front of their faces when they would pray. You would have a direct link with the Holy of Holies. So there is no turban or blah blah blah, this ephod and many kinds of stones. It was invented because there was a huge desire of being above the Ishmaelites because they were people of trade. But then the Israelites, they were only the people of tabernacling. So then the Israelites began then obviously to kind of try to envy then the first son, and then they invented lots of situations and instructions where they don't belong there. Thus takanot. So then the giver of the understanding is the inventory of the cave found by Ronald. There are no garments there because the Messiah was using it. So then we find ourselves then understanding then takanot, cleaning up the holy instructions from those, and masim, cleaning up the instructions from those. Make sure the instructions they are absolutely intact. When we understand this fact, then we can move on and do our trade, because no person must tamper with instructions. So then as we do this, then we can evaluate the flow of events from then Daniel the 11th chapter, because it is a further refinement of the iron and clay. You find traces also in Yirmiyahu. You find traces of the understanding of Daniel. So then when Yirmiyahu was around prior of Daniel, we find then sections where then Yirmiyahu was then the prophet, but he was also giving understandings of the future related with the Gentile level. During the time of Yirmiyahu, the nation was going through many evils, and not very many people over there that were godly. So Yirmiyahu had the entire burden of not only understanding tabernacling, understanding the Gentile level, understanding then foreign nations invading the land, but he also gave instructions of the future. But these are then not mixed, but they are, in quote, encoded. as we understand these areas, not because the encoding done on purpose. It's because the way the information came out of Yirmiyahu had then many layers at the same time. So we must understand how to place them during the time of the first tabernacle service, the second tabernacle service. We find in the period of the Gentiles during the first tabernacle service, then the second tabernacle service also Gentile level period. Then you find in areas of the time of the seat of 1,000 years, no tabernacling. Then you find the restoration period. Each of those are layered in Yirmiyahu the prophet. So sometimes you think you are reading from the first tabernacle service level of Gentile when you read amongst the kingdoms of the time, but then when you understand tabernacling, you detect then the conversation related with the kingdoms of the future, related with the re-establishment of the second tabernacle services, and then lines up with Daniel. So these are very important, because Daniel, the 11th chapter, it is a refinement of the period of time of iron and clay. We understand iron and clay started after the legs of iron, or Rome, was dismantled. Then there was a period of the 1,000 years of the seat. Then after 09, we've entered instantly of the time of the restoration period and the time of the dragon. Devil no longer exists, because the time period is another time. The time of devil or devilish, or then lying or cheating, or then mixing politics with trade, then those times are gone. We are during the time of the restoration, where then devil no longer exists. Per the instructions, they don't exist anymore. When you find a person lying to you, you understand, this devil lying. But then you are not going by what people are doing. You locked your mind on what the instructions are saying and where we are locked with it. After 09, no longer devil. It is dragon. That's why then the Chinese dragon is in the east coming through the Pacific. The Asia market is the precision of trade, computerized trade. If you analyze, for instance, Singapore, if you analyze China, if you analyze Taiwan and the Asian countries, you understand a lot of computerized trade, precision, direct trade, transactions. These are the direct trade that must be made worldwide. So when the Messiah then reads the instructions from then Galah or Revelation, then the Messiah is saying in the future, and the freighters of the earth. Because direct trade is a direct relation with the freighting. That's why then we understand the time of the dragon, but it's not a bad term. People get confused. People confuse serpent, they confuse Nahashatan, they confuse dragon, they confuse the whole situation as evil. No, it's not evil. Dragon means precision. If you think of evil, you have to understand tabernacling. If you don't understand tabernacling, what you think of is evil then is your own opinion. Evil only exists when tabernacling is then shining or polished, or then recuperated, or then refurbished. Then we understand the discrepancy of the world being in a dark place versus tabernacling as the light of the world. So then during this time, then the 11th chapter is the refinement of the time of the restoration period from iron and clay. You have then first, second, and third kingdoms related with iron. China, Soviet Union, and then Africa. Those are the main players. The representative of Africa is Mr. Zuma, because he's part of the BRICS. BRICS is then the initiation of direct trade. Understandably, China then is not going to be able to hold the entire world in their system. must have help from another nation. That's when we understand a couple of chapters later of then in the Apocrypha, you understand then Baal the dragon. Baal then you understand as the Babylonian system. Dragon, precision. Precision of trade, transactions. Direct trade. Then we understand later, when the Mashiach speaks then in the 8th chapter and then 10 chapters later, freighters of the earth, because it's direct generation of volume of freighting. He no longer speaks of nations and kingdoms. He speaks of trade. By the time he speaks, then the Ishmaelites are then already given the stick of authority of trade, because they have the most crude. Direct relation from freighting and then volume of parcels is directly related with fuel. And you find most fuel then in Arabia. Arabia are then the sons of the Ishmael. So then those are the descendants of the first son of Ibrahim. Where then the second son is then focused in making sure they understand tabernacling and re-establishment of tabernacling. So they do what they should do. So what we can expect then from Israel? Israel has none other than direct relation with the northern Sudan, where the land of Cush is, because that's where the first tabernacling of the restoration period, where the second anointing then is given, is going to be at northern Sudan. There is no other objective for Israel other than northern Sudan. Then the rest of it then relies with the kingdom of the north making decisions as the filtering of the Babylonian system. It's not a bad term because it's related with trade. We are simply removing the devilish way of trade for thousands of years, and then re-establishing then direct trade. That's the only meaning of it. So then, understandably, countries then later doing trade with China goes through the northern kingdom. Speaking of the Babylonian side of it, as far as the Asian side, obviously they are on the same page. So then you begin to understand what it means. As far as there's Syria, the government must remain as it is. The decision of the northern kingdom is making sure the system remains as it is, and then later, when the system is refurbished, then making further decisions. Because Syria, as we understand, they have very deadly weapons, and it's very dangerous. It's not worth it. Plus, it's not the opinion of the world to do what they want anymore. They should take care of their own economies. They should take care of their own tracking system. As we then wait for the Chinese system then becomes available in the future via downloading, then we must encounter our economies lined up with it. Otherwise it's total ruin and chaos. We think we can manage the problems, but then there is a situation going on. After 09, there is a schedule already set more than 2,500 years ago. And it is taking place, liking it or not liking it. We are no longer privileged of the time of 1,000 years to do whatever we want. Those times are gone. And we have proven ourselves absolutely ridiculous. We made a junk out of the world. Then the Creator is showing how to do the work, but each then doing his part. So then the instructions are never tempered. Then we can analyze the consequences of the contrary of the instructions. That's where we use our own wisdom. Always admit the whole instructions must never be tempered. So then on the other side of the situation is the ability of understanding if nations they do contrary. At the moment, we understand there was an agent over there of the CIA in the Northern Kingdom and got caught spying around. So then we hope this person then won't end up being shot, because as we remind ourselves, during the time of the Soviet Union, spies were dealt with very harshly. We find then our government is spying in the media, so then we got caught. So that's another reason for us to retrieve and rebuild. Because when the system then becomes available for downloading, then we can't complain later. Because IMF a couple of years ago gave an estimate. Even the Prime Minister of Israel was in line with IMF. So when both of them they line up together, boy, listen, write it down, and make sure to have a record of it. We have 36 months to get our economy lined up with freighting. But the objective is very simple. Visiting with the freighters, the CEOs of the freighters of this country, and come up with a system, a computerized system using tracking as a means of deduction of taxes. It's not complicated, but it has to be done. But then sometimes the government is repleted with people with the inflated ego. And then they think themselves so much important than freighting, and they maintaining their printing out more money festival, and then the time expires and we find ourselves in trouble. Because the Messiah already gave the answer in the future, and the freighters of the earth is a relation directly with government, then related with the freighting. He's not talking about anymore those kingdoms, all because kingdoms. No, he's saying the freighters of the earth, because freighting and then parcels and then packages and containers are the most important in the future where the Messiah is at. So then, understandably, since there is a clear route of the future, we should be concerned with the deadly time of the downloading. That's where then we must be aware of there is a system in place where then you understand you can purchase, you can invest under the same system. The system being foreign, you transfer your funding into this system where you have then investment, you can make purchases via a foreign system. So then we understand why then there was this equipment in space launched a few days ago. It is specific for trade. So what can you expect? It is a special signal, special system. It's not the same as the internet. Those is then they have a characteristic of the regular internet, but it's not the same. It's exclusive for trade. If you read the understanding of the satellite characteristic, it is directly related with trade. It's not the same signal. So when the system comes, then you receive in your computer. It is receivable. But the way the system works is not the same as then the internet. Then you take your funding, you transfer into the system, and then the government is out of it. They can't read it. Because this system is behind the rights of usage. Then you have a certain amount over there, as you would if you have eBay or PayPal. You understand there is an amount over there, but you can use for purchases. But then you find an extra icon over there you can invest. Then you categorize what you want to invest. If you want to invest in maritime products. So if you want to invest then in electrical products or electronic, you select those and you invest on a product. And the governments, they can't read it. They can invest in themselves, but they can't read somebody else. How are they going then to charge taxes? And when people are ordering their parcels, how then the government is going to maintain a record if they don't have a record from the tracking at the moment? Thus then the understanding of these freighters of this country coming together and lending the government their tracking system for taxation purposes. But the problem is the government is sometimes so overinflated with importance and they neglect what's obvious. And there you are, the CIA agent was caught in the act. We hope then they can maintain his life and maybe kick him out of the country. Because back then during the Soviet Union we wouldn't hear any more of this person. And have it in mind, Mr. Putin used to be a KGB agent. So he knows what he's talking about. It's very dangerous. So then the fact is, then Mr. Bernanke has a big job of then visiting with the freighters, coming up with a system, having then the freighters lending their tracking systems, so then the government can line up the freighters and deducting taxes instantly of every package. Then he must categorize those who are sending packages as a moving, or they have already purchased their own. They are not doing retail, but it's their own personal products, for the reasons of moving, and then it has to have a category of it. Because the main objective of these is tracking what's coming from overseas as retail. Those must be absolutely taxed. So then the government has a record of it. Because when the system is downloaded, then it's over with. There is no way of retracing back. Because by this time, then the freighters, they will adjust themselves, and then there is no way for the government then to first, they have to fight with the rights, they have to go to court, and then how they're going to get paid. Our system would be then inactive. So while our system is active and there is time, we should line up the freighters with taxation, so then we understand later when then freighting becomes then the primary. If we don't do this, then when the system comes, then you'll find the politicians stare at each other like stupid people. And then goes to Pearl Harbor. We then had problems with Pearl Harbor because they did not face facts. There was a radar over there on the top of the mountain picking up signal in a radar coming from the northeast. They made the wrong judgment. They thought were then aircrafts coming from the mainland, and then were the Japanese coming from the east. There you find China making a deal with Argentina, China making a deal with Pakistan, China making a deal then with India. They closed seven mining trade partnerships on Sunday. You know what this means? They have their production raw materials covered. When the system becomes available, and the nations they try to do any kind of a idea or plan of going against China, they are covered. So let's make sure we understand the trade of the end and what it takes then to get at least freighting and taxation lined up. Because our government is overinflated with importance, and every time they are making a very bad decision. They made a bad decision in Israel some time ago. They made a bad decision then in the Soviet Union. CIA agent got caught up. And every time we are further into problems where we should have then retrieved and rebuild. But then the self-importance or self-generated importance goes beyond reason. When we understand the holy instructions and we understand then what should not be done, then if we do, we can evaluate the consequences very quickly. And if we don't do it, we got a period of time, 36 months and counting down. When the dreadful downloading comes, then the government won't complain. In fact, they have already the Ozarks, police state, FEMA camps. What do you think are those? They want to depopulate Louisiana, parts of the Gulf Coast. So if the government, they are not doing what's obvious, taxation and freighting, what can you expect? Civil war.